Hello, and welcome to a tutorial about cultural fervor in Victoria 3. One of the main new mechanics that came with the 1.10 update is the ability to measure a culture's level of nationalism and the effects that scale from it. Now cultures will gain what we call cultural fervor, and this will bring about effects both good and bad, depending on what you want from that culture. The way the devs described it, which I think is a good, concise way to summarize it, cultural fervor is a measure of a culture's national spirit. Like all mechanics in the game, there are things that you can do to promote this and suppress it. In this video, we're going to go over what kind of effects high cultural fervor can have on your country, what goes into gaining or losing cultural fervor, and then what happens once a culture gets a very high level of it. From the tooltip, we see that when a culture has high fervor, they will assimilate more slowly, form more radicals when conquered, and increase liberty desire and be more likely to join cultural movements. I've previously done a video about cultural assimilation and religious conversion, and everything in that video is still accurate and goes into why you would want pops to assimilate and what you can do to get them to. But let's take a very quick moment to look at why you should care about assimilation and conversion. One of the examples I used in that video was Ecuador. Looking at their list of pops, you can see Amazonian has a very low level of acceptance. Right now they're at 0. The country has two states, the state of Ecuador and the state of Pastaza. The reason why assimilation is important is because even though Amazonian pops make up a small amount of the total population of Ecuador, Amazonians make up 86.9% of the state of Pastaza. So even though they are a small amount when looking at the whole country, they are the vast majority of one of your two states. That means 86.9% of the pops here have an acceptance of 0. At least for their culture. So when playing with Ecuador, you want Amazonian pops to assimilate into your primary culture of North Andean. But now with cultural fervor, there is a situation where their rate of assimilation will be greatly decreased. Cultural fervor can help you keep liberty desire up if you keep your primary culture in a state of high fervor. You can see here in Hungary, they are getting plus 0.05 points of liberty desire per week because of the fervor of the Hungarian culture. So these are some of the reasons why cultural fervor should matter to you. But let's look at how it's calculated and how you can manipulate it. We're going to use Great Britain as our example, and you can see we are in the debug mode so that we can change laws instantly to see the effects it has. To see what a culture's current level of fervor is, go to the Society screen and click on the Cultures tab. There's a new column here that tells you what the current fervor of that culture is and which direction it's trending, up, down, or steady. When you click on a culture, you'll see a new fervor section up top here. There's a couple of things these numbers are telling you. First, the current fervor of the English culture is 33. It is drifting towards 59 by a value of plus 0.26 points a month. And this symbol right here means the English culture has reached a point called national awakening. We'll get into what that means in a moment. When you put your mouse over it, you get the breakdown of how these numbers are being calculated. Here's the first thing you need to understand about cultural fervor. It is not specific to a country. A culture's fervor is the same for that culture in all countries. Now, what is happening to that culture in a country affects the fervor calculation, but what is happening to the culture in one country affects the culture in all countries. Switching to the United States, you see they have a population of English pops here as well. When we put our mouse over the cultural fervor value, you'll notice it's all the same numbers because this is the cultural fervor calculation for the English culture worldwide. Going back to Great Britain, if you put your mouse over the word fervor to bring up the tooltip, it has a list of what will increase fervor and what will decrease it. First is being the primary culture of an independent country with an applicable citizenship law. You can bring up another tooltip on the word applicable to see the values for each law. So you see here at the bottom, the English culture is getting plus 14 points of cultural fervor because they are the primary culture in one country, Great Britain. Going back to the tooltip, we see a culture gets plus 15 points of fervor for being on the citizenship law of national supremacy. And of course, going back to the Society screen, we see that Great Britain is on national supremacy. So you see, the more repressive your citizenship law is, the more fervor your primary culture gets. Or another way to put it, the more your citizenship law gives less points to non-primary cultures, the more fervor your primary culture gets. But you might have noticed that the English culture is getting plus 14, not plus 15. That's because, remember, cultural fervor is the same for all English pops around the world, but citizenship laws are specific to countries. So the English culture gets a percentage of this plus 15 points based on the percentage of English pops that are in Great Britain. On the culture screen, if you scroll down, you'll see a breakdown of the English pops in your country and the English pops worldwide. Right now, there are 13.7 million English pops in Great Britain, but worldwide, there are a total of 14.5 million. 13.7 divided by 14.5 equals 0.945. So the English pops in Great Britain account for 94.5% of the English pops worldwide. So 15 times 0.945 and you get 14.175. And that's how we get plus 14 from being primary culture in one independent country affected by different citizenship laws enacted. We can test this with a culture that is the primary in two different countries with two different sets of laws. On the culture screen for Great Britain, we see they have two primary cultures, English and Scottish. So let's release Scotland as an independent country. Now that we have an independent Scotland, when we bring up the tooltip for Scottish cultural fervor, they are getting plus 14 points for citizenship laws, but we see they are listed as having two independent countries, Great Britain and Scotland, which both have the same citizenship laws currently. Let's change Scotland's law to cultural exclusion. Now you see they are only getting plus 6. Let's look at why. With cultural exclusion, you only get plus 5 points of fervor. Scrolling down on the Scottish culture screen, we see there are 2.27 million Scottish pops in Scotland, but globally, there are 2.98 million. 2.27 divided by 2.98 and you get 0.761. So about 76% of Scottish pops live in Scotland. On the British census data, we see there are still 611,000 Scottish pops in Great Britain. 611k divided by 2,980k, and you get 0.205. So about 20.5% of Scottish pops live in Great Britain. Great Britain gives 15 points of fervor for their citizenship law, so 15 times 0.205 and you get 3.075. Scotland gives 5 points of fervor, so 5 times 0.761 and you get 3.805. Add 3.075 to 3.805 and you get 6.88. This is why the Scottish culture is getting plus 6 for citizenship laws. Remember, this only applies for the laws in countries where Scottish is a primary culture and if the country is independent. Switching to Transvaal, we see the primary culture is Boer, but they are the lowest population in the country. When we look at the most populous culture, Sotho, and we look at the breakdown of their cultural fervor, they don't have anything listed for citizenship laws. This is because Sotho is not the primary culture in any country, so they don't get a value for it. Going back to Great Britain, another thing that can give you cultural fervor is if you have public schools. You see it can add plus 15 education institution fervor. So let's switch to that and see what we get. Looking at the tooltip for English fervor, we have a new entry. They are getting plus 15 points for being the primary culture in one country with an applicable education institution. We are getting plus 14 points and not plus 15 because of the same reason we went over with the citizenship law. This will change based on the level of the institution. At the lowest level, you get plus 5 fervor, and at the highest level, you get plus 25. We still have Scotland as an independent country, so when we look at Scottish culture, they are getting plus 3 points because Scotland has religious schools, which doesn't give anything for cultural fervor. We already know Great Britain accounts for 20.5% of the Scottish pops worldwide, so 15 times 0.205, and we get 3.075. This is why the Scottish culture gets plus 3 points for education. The next thing you can get fervor for is if your culture has casualties in a war. In this example, we're using the stream series I'm doing as Serbia. We were just dragged into a war since we're still a subject of the Ottoman Empire. We sustained 30.3 thousand casualties in that war, so we are getting plus 3 points of cultural fervor because of that. Having a high average literacy will increase fervor, and I found this is one of the largest increases to fervor, along with the next one, having a number of academic pops of this culture. So building universities and having academics employed will give fervor to the culture they belong to. Next is pops of this culture residing in countries that have researched nationalism and pan-nationalism. What will decrease fervor is if your citizenship law becomes multiculturalism. It will decrease the fervor of your primary cultures. And lastly, if a culture has a high average acceptance. The English culture is losing 4 points of acceptance because of it. The way you get this -4 is from the acceptance levels. A culture being in full acceptance gives you -4, second-class citizen gives you -3, open prejudice gives you -2, cultural eraser gives you -1, and violent hostility doesn't take any fervor points away from a culture. These are all pretty small values though, so generally the acceptance of a pop won't have too much effect once you start getting to higher cultural fervor values. We see the English culture is getting plus 20 from having a national awakening. Once a culture reaches 25 points of fervor, the culture can have a national awakening and then gain additional fervor points. This is significant because of how the rate of change of cultural fervor is calculated. Right now, the English culture has 33 points of fervor, but it is drifting to 59. To get the monthly rate of change, you take the potential number and subtract the current number. 59 minus 33 equals 26, and that's where you get the plus 0.26 points added each month. This means the closer you get to the potential fervor, the slower the progress gets. This is why fervor is something that will take some time to get to high levels with. When a culture gets a national awakening, they immediately get plus 20 points of potential fervor. The culture might have been drifting at a slow rate. Let's say a culture has a potential target of 30 and it's currently at 24.95. The difference is 5.05, so the rate of change will only be plus 0.05. The next month it adds that number, and now the current cultural fervor is 25. The culture gets a national awakening, and 20 points is added to the target number of 30. Now the potential fervor target is 50. 50 minus 25 equals 25. So now the rate of change is plus 0.25. The point the national awakening happens, you get a boost to the rate of increase for your cultural fervor. You can see on the map which cultures have had a national awakening. All of the points with that icon are the points where the culture in that country had a national awakening. You see, though, the vast majority of your cultural fervor points will come from literacy, academics, and your national awakening, though casualties in war will also add a lot if you've suffered heavy losses. At the beginning of the video, I went over some of the effects cultural fervor can have, but the largest effect will be the political movements in your country. Let's look at Prussia in 1840. You can see they have a lot of cultures with a few getting to decent levels and all of their fervor increasing. But add on top of that what we see over here, a Polish national movement. Cultural fervor will affect cultural political movements. Now, this movement has low support, but it has an elevated level of activism, currently 59%, which is protesting. When we look at the tooltip, we see this movement is getting plus 10.6% of activism because the Polish culture currently has 40 fervor. Once a movement gets activism of 50%, they enter a new state called obstinance. This is a new middle ground between a movement being peaceful and militant. Obstinance can only occur in cultural movements. You can see the German national movement can cause obstinance. This is letting you know the movement is eligible for it if the activism gets above 50%. But you see, the absolutist movement doesn't have that listed because this movement isn't based around a culture. Obstinance can cause a number of problems in your country. Mainly, it causes a reduction in assimilation, tax collection, conscription, and the impact your institutions have. We can see here there are currently 9 states in Prussia suffering these effects. You might have noticed when we go to the Polish national movement, the map changes to show us the states with heightened obstinance effects. You can also tell if a state is suffering from obstinance because now you'll see it on the state overview screen here. When you put your mouse over the number, the tooltip will tell you exactly what's happening in this state. The state is suffering from negative 20.2% tax collection. Putting your mouse over the weekly budget, and then the unrealized taxes, and then over the uncollected taxes, we see Posen is losing about 1,000 pounds of taxes because of the effects of obstinance from the Polish national movement. Back to the tooltip for obstinance in Posen, the state is also suffering from negative 20% assimilation and conversion, so Pops in this state will assimilate and convert at a much lower rate. Also, negative 40.42% impact of institutions. Prussia has a level 2 education institution, giving states a plus 25% education access. Let's look at the state of Westphalia. You'll notice they don't have obstinance listed on their overview screen. This is because when you look at the population tab, they don't have any Polish Pops. Any state that has Polish Pops will suffer some degree of obstinance. Brandenburg has 1.01% Polish Pops present in the state, so they have obstinance as well. It's very minimal because there's such a small Polish population. Going back to Westphalia and looking at their info tab, you see their listing for plus 25% education access, getting the full amount of the education institution. But when we go back to Posen, they are only getting plus 14% education access, again because of the negative 40.42% impact of institutions. And lastly, the state loses 33% of their conscriptable battalions. So you can see obstinance can cause a lot of problems for the states in your country, and you get to obstinance from having cultures with high fervor forming cultural political movements. So how do you counteract this? Well, you can always try to pass a law the movement likes. The Polish national movement would prefer subjecthood or racial segregation. They'll even be content with multiculturalism or cultural exclusion. What they don't want is ethnostate or our current law, national supremacy. If you put your mouse over protesting and bring up the tooltip, it'll show you the full breakdown of why they're upset. So 5% from the national supremacy law. So again, changing your citizenship law will help alleviate this. A big one is the amount of radicals in the state. So if you get events that will lower radicalism, that will help. Plus 5.56% from the Polish standard of living. So building staple goods in the states where there are Polish Pops, thus making the goods more affordable, will counter this. Plus 20% from base acceptance level being level 2 cultural eraser. So increasing Polish acceptance levels will be a big help. And lastly, the cultural fervor of Polish Pops. And this brings us to the last thing to consider when it comes to cultural fervor. Looking at the Polish culture and their breakdown for fervor, they are getting plus 13 for something called country modifiers. Bringing up the tooltip for that, it's coming from Russia. And another tooltip will tell you there's something in Russia called Organic Statute of 1832. Looking at Russia and scrolling down, you see under their modifiers, they have something called Organic Statute of 1832, and they have it for 45 years. This is taking away 18.3 acceptance from Polish Pops in Russia. This modifier adds up to 27.4 fervor to the Polish culture, proportional to the amount of Polish Pops that live in Russia. From the Polish culture screen, we see there are a total of 9.08 million Polish Pops in the world. Looking at Russian census data, there are 4.14 million Polish Pops in Russia. 4.14 divided by 9.08 equals 0.455. So Russia houses about 45.5% of the global Polish population. Take the 27.4 fervor modifier and multiply it by 0.455 and you get 12.467. Which is why the cultural fervor of the Polish culture is getting plus 12.51 or plus 13 points of cultural fervor. This means the more Polish people that live in Russia, the more the Polish culture will add to its fervor because of this modifier. And this is the thing to remember. What happens to a culture in one country affects the culture in all countries. 13 points of cultural fervor are being added to the Polish culture because of an event in Russia, making their fervor target 43 with a current fervor of 40. The Polish national movement in Prussia is getting plus 10.06% of activism in their Polish national movement because of the Polish culture having 40 fervor. So the event in neighboring Russia is affecting the states of Prussia by giving the Polish national movement obstinance.
The butterfly effect. A butterfly can flap its wings in Peking, and in Central Park you get rain instead of sunshine.
In a nutshell, the mechanic of cultural fervor now means you must really keep an eye on your cultural movements because they can literally cause you to lose money, along with many other important things. But as we saw, it can also be a benefit to you. If you are a subject of another country, you can use cultural fervor to increase your liberty desire, along with increasing your war support during an eventual independence war. You have to keep an eye on the cultures in your country and make sure you don't let their fervor get to a point that might create a secessionist political movement. The last thing we'll look at that factors into this idea of cultural political movements and using them to your advantage is the new diplomatic action supporting separatism. Now, when you unlock nationalism, you unlock the ability to support separatist movements in other countries. When your primary culture exists in another country and there's a cultural minority movement for that culture in the target country, you can use this start supporting separatism action to increase the pop attraction and activism for that cultural minority movement. Seeing the effects that the Polish national movement is having on Prussia, which is a cultural minority movement in Prussia, if we took this action on Austria, we can hopefully create the same problems for them with the German national movement. All of this adds an interesting number of layers to diplomacy and internal politics that you must keep an eye on, because now it very well might affect your number go up. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like and the channel a subscribe. Every time you do, Robert Lewandowski scores one more goal for the Polish national movement. That's it for now. As always, be awesome.